For decades, King Charles has weathered storms, scandals, scrutiny, and the weight of expectation. But this is different. A shocking statement from Prince William and Kate Middleton has made headlines, not for its contents per se, but for the shift in power it's causing. King Charles trembles as questions swirl around the country. Is his reign already over? Is he the true King of Britain? Or is he simply acting as a placeholder for the regents the world seems to be waiting for? As tensions rise, the royal family faces a decision that could reshape the monarchy forever. The tension in the royal family. King Charles had always been a figure of controlled decorum, his emotions locked away behind years of royal training. But there was something different about him now, something beneath the surface that made those paying attention sit up a little straighter. It wasn't in what he said, but rather in what he didn't say. It wasn't in what he did, but in what he so carefully avoided doing. And at the center of it all was Kate Middleton. The tension wasn't born out of a single moment, but rather a string of small, almost imperceptible slights that rubbed many in the wrong way. The public first noticed it at the Commonwealth Day service. It was a formal occasion, steeped in tradition, where every move was planned down to the second. King Charles greeted his son, Prince William, with warmth, a clear display of affection that, while rare in royal settings, felt intentional. But when he turned to Kate, the temperature dropped. No embrace, not even a lingering touch on the arm. Just a polite smile, practiced and distant. For anyone else, it might have gone unnoticed. But this was the Princess of Wales, the woman the public had embraced as their future queen. And the distance between her and the king, however subtle, spoke volumes. Then came the message, or rather, the absence of one. On International Women's Day, the royal family shared a tribute to its most influential female figures: Queen Elizabeth, Queen Camilla, Princess Anne, the Duchess of Edinburgh. All carefully selected names meant to showcase the strength of royal women through the generations. But the name that was missing was Kate Middleton's. Social media was swift to react. "Where is Kate?" one user demanded. "The Princess of Wales doesn't exist anymore?" another quipped. The omission wasn't just curious, it was deafening. Kate, the most visible woman in the modern monarchy, was simply not there. The palace remained silent, as it always did in the face of speculation. But speculation has a way of growing legs when there are no answers to pin it down. Theories began to swirl. Was this a mistake? A mere oversight? Or was it a message, delivered without words, but meant to be understood by those who knew where to look? Since stepping into the role of Princess of Wales, Kate had become more than just the poised wife of Prince William. She had become a figure of strength, of dignity, a woman the public trusted. And trust is a dangerous thing in the world of monarchy, where power is as much about perception as it is about birthright. The British public had never fully accepted Camilla, no matter how much time passed. For many, Diana's shadow was too long, her legacy too powerful. And then came Kate, graceful, composed, effortlessly slipping into a role that had once belonged to the beloved Princess of Wales. The comparisons were inevitable. Some even whispered that Kate was fulfilling the destiny that had once been Diana's. In recent months, Kate and William's popularity had surged. They had become the faces of a new modern monarchy. Polls showed them consistently ranking higher than King Charles and Queen Camilla. They were the ones the public looked to, the ones who seemed to represent the future. And that was a problem. The monarchy has always survived on the delicate balance of power. It's a machine that operates best when every cog knows its place. But what happens when one cog starts to outshine the rest? Kate's cancer diagnosis only deepened the divide. When the news became public, King Charles was quick to offer words of support, calling her his beloved daughter-in-law. He too was going through the exact same challenge, and Kate herself was quick to offer support in return. The public was supposed to rally behind them both during these difficult times, but its reaction revealed something the monarchy had always feared: a shift in loyalty. People rallied around Kate and Kate only. Their sympathy, their concern, their unwavering support. She became, in that moment, the heart of the royal family. And if there's one thing history has proven, it's that the monarchy does not like competing hearts. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps the cold greeting, the missing tribute, the widening gap between Kate and Charles were all simply coincidences. But the thing about the royal family is that very little happens by accident. Every gesture, every omission, every carefully crafted statement, or lack thereof, carries meaning. So it had to be addressed, and that's what Kate Middleton and Prince William aimed to do. The unexpected confrontation. The moment had been coming for a while, slow and steady, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Standing before the cameras, Prince William and Kate Middleton weren't just here to perform another royal duty. This was different. Their expressions were serious, their words carefully chosen. It wasn't just about the tension that had been simmering between him and Kate Middleton since Queen Elizabeth's death. That had been manageable, contained. But the cold greeting, the missing tribute, and the way Charles seemed to sidestep Kate in ways that couldn't be dismissed as coincidence. The public had noticed, of course. The whispers had grown louder, the speculation harder to ignore. But William had said nothing, until now. The confrontation had been subtle, almost unspoken, but those who had been there knew exactly what had happened. It had begun with a look, just a flicker of something in William's eyes, as his father once again overlooked Kate, barely acknowledging her presence at an official gathering. A moment later, William had turned to his wife, his hand resting lightly on hers. It was a statement, a quiet one, but unmistakable. He had noticed, and he was not going to let it pass. What came next wasn't loud. There were no raised voices, no dramatic gestures. That wasn't how things were done in the royal family. But it was tense. A few words exchanged in private, sharp enough that those nearby felt the weight of them. Charles dismissed it at first, brushing past William's concern with the same cold detachment he had shown toward Kate. And then, just when he thought the matter had been dealt with, they stepped forward. William and Kate's announcement was brief, but it didn't need to be long to send shockwaves through Buckingham Palace. Those closest to the royal family understood immediately what had happened. William and Kate weren't just affirming their commitment to their roles, they were making it clear that they intended to shape the future of the monarchy in their own way. And Charles trembled. The irony was impossible to ignore. For years, Charles had watched as his own mother held on to power, keeping him at arm's length from the throne. And now, in an entirely different way, it was happening again. The monarchy was shifting beneath him, and he was not the one guiding its direction. But there was another layer to this. One that had been lurking just beneath the surface since the day Queen Elizabeth's will was read. That day had been strange enough on its own. The family had gathered in Buckingham Palace, tense with anticipation. And then, instead of Charles, it was Prince Andrew who had stepped forward to read their mother's final words. No one had expected that. Charles had remained silent as his brother read the document, but those who had been in the room had seen the way his hands tightened in his lap. And then the real shock came when the Queen's will had not followed the expected path. Certain estates, certain titles, things that should have gone directly to Charles, had instead been dispersed in unexpected ways. Sandringham to Anne, Balmoral to be shared among the family. Even Kate had been named directly, receiving the Vladimir tiara, a historic symbol of royal grace. It was a symbol of approval, a signal that, in the late Queen's eyes, Kate was not just a supporting figure in the monarchy, she was a cornerstone of it. Charles had held his composure, he had not protested. But those who knew him well had seen the stiffness in his posture, the controlled tightness of his smile. It had not been the smooth transition he had envisioned. And now, months later, William and Kate were making it clear that they had their own path to follow, especially concerning their son, Prince George. Charles couldn't simply exert his power as king and reclaim what should have been his, or force everyone else to fall back in line in the order he wanted. Because William was not just any prince. He was the direct heir, the man who would one day take the throne. And Kate was not just any princess. She was the woman the people adored, the future queen consort who had earned the public's trust in a way that few others had. And he was just Charles, a king by birthright, but just a placeholder in the hearts of the very people he was supposed to command. For years, Charles had understood that his reign would be shorter than his mother's. But what he had not anticipated was how quickly his influence might begin to fade. And as he stood there, watching his son and daughter-in-law take a step forward to make their own assertions, he felt a tremor, deep and undeniable. And when they spoke up, both Charles and the British monarchy trembled. Protecting Prince George. Prince William and Kate Middleton didn't mind the slights, the stiff smiles, the lack of attention or praise. They knew it would all fade from memory one day, when they were both sitting on the throne. But there was something they would not compromise on. They would not take a step back for their children, and specifically, Prince George. The young boy, second in line to the throne, had already been exposed to the weight of royal expectations. King Charles's coronation had been proof of that. While some had marveled at the sight of him standing with dignity beside his grandfather, others had seen the ghost of the past in his solemn gaze. They remembered another boy, decades ago, walking behind his mother's coffin, forced into the public eye before he even had the chance to understand what had been taken from him. That boy had been William, and now history was threatening to repeat itself. The shocking statement was as much a declaration as it was a warning. William and Kate had seen the pressures of royal life firsthand. They had watched as tradition turned their childhoods into performances, stripping away the innocence that should have been theirs, and they were not about to let it happen again, not to their son. And maybe their stance on the matter explains the coldness between King George and Kate Middleton. He might have thought that Kate poisoned her husband's mind, because William had spoken with unwavering resolve. They would not allow Prince George to be thrust into the same rigid mold that had once confined them. His role in the monarchy, while undeniable, would be shaped on their terms. Not by outdated expectations, not by the weight of a crown that had crushed so many before him. The public had always assumed that George's path was set in stone, that he would follow in his father's footsteps with no deviation, no discussion, that he would be groomed to rule from the moment he could walk, just as Charles had been, just as William had been. But this statement changed everything. "It's over," Prince William and Kate uttered when they were done laying down their conditions. The boy's role would be redefined within the monarchy. If Charles wanted Prince George to be included in formal events again, he would have to ask his parents' permission first. He would not be allowed to just order him around. They didn't care that he was king. On this, they would not back down. And if Charles tried to bypass them in any way, he would be done. King Charles remained composed after the discussion, but his fingers curled slightly against the armrest of his chair, and his breaths were measured but tight. Because this was not just about George. Not only. This was about control, and it was slipping out of his hands. For years, Charles had fought to define his reign, to assert his authority in a family that had never fully allowed him to step out of his mother's shadow. Now, just as he had settled into the throne, his son was carving out his own vision for the future. Charles inhaled slowly, controlling the tremor in his hands. He could not afford to react now. Not here. Not in front of so many people. But behind closed doors, he was able to unravel the depths behind the statement his son had made. There were too many challenges facing the monarchy all at once, and while the king was no stranger to internal strife, this was a different kind of battle he wasn't prepared for. The bigger implications. King Charles had lived through decades of challenges in the monarchy. He had his own struggles with the institution, the fallout of his marriage to Princess Diana, and the never-ending battle to define his reign in the shadow of his mother. But this was different. It was about the future of the throne. And then Kate Middleton's absence from public life had fueled speculation, with whispers about her health growing louder with each passing day. When she finally revealed her cancer diagnosis, the news sent shockwaves through the nation. The princess, known for her unwavering composure, was facing one of the greatest battles of her life. And yet, even as she underwent treatment, the weight of royal duty never truly lifted. So, the monarchy was in a fragile place. Especially since King Charles himself was also battling illness, and while he continued to fulfill his responsibilities, the question lingered. How much longer could he sustain the role? With both the king and the future queen consort facing health challenges, the weight of the crown rested even more heavily on William's shoulders. Perhaps that was why the statement about Prince George was made now. Perhaps it wasn't just about shielding their son from the pressures of royal life, but about ensuring that the monarchy itself evolved. William and Kate had seen firsthand how rigid tradition could be, how it could break those who were unprepared for its demands. The last thing they wanted was for their son to be trapped in the same cycle. But their stance had raised concerns. If George's role in the monarchy was to be redefined, where did that leave the institution as a whole? Behind palace doors, discussions were underway. Some royal advisors believed the statement was necessary, a modern approach to ensure the monarchy remained relevant in a changing world. Others saw it as dangerous, a move that could weaken the very structure that had kept the institution intact for centuries. And then there was the issue of Kate's relationship with King Charles. The public had once believed that Charles and his daughter-in-law shared a close bond, but recent events had raised doubts. Some dismissed it as royal protocol. Others weren't so sure. King Charles had spent years preparing for this reign, believing that once he took the throne, he would finally be able to shape the monarchy in his image. But with William and Kate's growing presence and their clear intent to approach things differently, his vision was no longer the only one that mattered. The future of the crown was no longer just about him. Another king in the past could have raged, punished, excluded, denied any appeal. But Charles knew that throwing a tantrum would only make him look even more frail in the eyes of the British citizens. Public opinion was not on his side here, had never been, not when picture-perfect Kate Middleton was on the other. He would have to show grace if he wanted to live his last years as king with any kind of dignity. The implication was clear. Despite being the rightful king, the man sitting on the throne, his reign was already over. Charles III was already done. This was not the time to fight back. This was the time for Charles to smile and save face. A king or a placeholder. The king has spent his entire life preparing for the throne, yet nothing could have prepared him for the internal challenges he would face. The weight of history, the burden of expectation, and now, the unraveling of the very foundation he thought was secure. His mind is restless, racing between the past and the present, searching for clarity in a storm of uncertainty. Should he fight back against the shifting tides, or should he yield, adapting to this unexpected turn? The crown was never a gift. It was a sentence, passed down from the moment of his birth. His arrival into the world was announced with royal gun salutes, his future already written before he could speak his first words. Unlike most children, whose paths are theirs to forge, Charles's destiny had been carved into stone. At just 3 years old, he was named the heir to the throne when his mother, Queen Elizabeth, ascended. The role he would grow into was not one of choice, but of duty. A duty that isolated him from the very world he was meant to one day rule. His childhood was anything but ordinary. While the public marveled at the young prince, a lonely boy grew up behind the palace walls. His mother, the queen, was distant, bound by her role as monarch, and his father, Prince Philip, was unyielding in his discipline. There was little room for warmth, for comfort, for the kind of childhood most would consider normal. But he never cried out. He endured silently, as though he had already learned that loneliness was simply part of his existence. And then there was the press. From an early age, Charles was scrutinized, his every move analyzed and critiqued. He once confessed in an interview that he despised being a performing monkey, but there was no escape from the cameras. He was expected to smile, to wave, to be the prince the public demanded him to be. Even as he grew older, the pressure never lessened. His love life, his marriage, his struggles, they all became public property, dissected without mercy. But through it all, he waited. 7 decades passed, and finally, his moment came. The death of Queen Elizabeth thrust him onto the throne, an ascension both long expected and yet, in many ways, deeply uncertain. He had inherited a monarchy transformed by time, shaped by the reign of a mother who had been unwavering in her role. She had been loved, respected, seen as the very embodiment of duty. Charles, however, had always struggled with public perception. He was neither as adored nor as unshakable. And now, barely 2 years into his reign, the cracks were deepening. He had expected challenges. He had anticipated the pressures of modernizing the monarchy, of proving his worth as king, but he had not foreseen this, his own son and daughter-in-law becoming the center of a storm that threatened to shake the institution itself. Prince William's statement, Kate Middleton's illness, the whispered questions about the future of the crown. These were not the battles Charles had prepared for. And yet, they were the ones he now had to fight. It was impossible to ignore the unspoken reality. William and Kate's popularity had long since eclipsed his own. The public adored them, saw in them a future that was fresh, stable, and reassuring. In contrast, Charles still carried the weight of past scandals, of lingering doubts. His reign, though still young, already seemed like a transition rather than a true era of rule. And with every moment that William stepped forward, with every show of strength he displayed in the face of Kate's illness, Charles couldn't help but wonder, was he being overshadowed in his own reign? The past whispered in his mind. The loneliness of his childhood, the rigid expectations, the feeling of being out of step with those around him. He had always struggled to fit the mold, and now, decades later, he wondered if he ever truly had. The crown was his, but was he merely holding it for the next in line? Was his role not to reign, but to pass the torch? He could feel the weight of history pressing down, the echoes of monarchs before him who had faced their own moments of crisis. Some had fought, clinging to their power. Others had yielded, adapting to the tides of change. He had spent his entire life preparing for this role. But had he ever truly asked himself, what kind of king did he want to be? As he sat in quiet contemplation, the storm outside Buckingham Palace seemed to mirror the one inside his mind. The world was watching, waiting for his next move. Would he fight to assert his reign? Or would he adapt, embracing the changing landscape of the monarchy? Only time would tell. What do you make of King Charles's reaction to Prince William's statement? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.